Hey, my name is Tyler Gray. Welcome back to Between the Lines, where this week I will be informing you on the early history of the Islamic Empire. Not Islam specifically, but more the Islamic Empire in general. So, a lot of classical history, most people think of, the Roman Empire, which fell around 476 Common Era. And after that, it just sort of devolves into the Dark Ages of Europe. However, over further east in what is now the Middle East, Muhammad was born about 100 years later in Mecca in around 570. He didn't start preaching until 610. Now, at the time, Mecca was controlled by a bunch of wealthy merchants, and also in the area was Medina, another major city which thrived through commerce, as well as the Bedouin tribes of Arabia that were pretty constantly at war with each other. There was not much centralization of power. It was sort of, every man for themselves, due to infighting between the tribes and merchant opposition to being ruled by a single person. They didn't much care for the idea of anyone interfering with their business. Because of this, the ruling merchants in Mecca started to get scared of Muhammad's teachings as they saw it as a threat to their wealth and power. So they started persecuting Muhammad's followers. They then fled to Abyssinia and then Medina in 622, and this fleeing was known as the Hijra. Once they arrived in Medina, Muhammad united the tribes under the Constitution of Medina. It included several non-Muslim Jewish tribes as well, and allowed freedom of religious belief. Because to them, it wasn't so much about, it was partially about the religion, of course, but it was very much just coming together under a single banner. However, despite their fleeing, the Muslims at the time were still being persecuted in Mecca, and they did not much care for that. So in response, they started raiding Meccan caravans. Supposedly, one raid was even led by Muhammad himself. In retaliation to that, the Meccans attacked Medina but were repelled, at which point they agreed to a treaty. However, the treaty did not last very long, and just a few years later, Mecca violated it. And that really ticked off Muhammad and his followers, who gathered up a large force of around 10,000 people, according to some accounts, and conquered Mecca in 629. However, Muhammad died just a few years later in 632, which gives rise to the first official caliphate, which was the de facto government of the Islamic Empire. Upon Muhammad's death, the Quraysh tribe, hope I'm saying that right, of Mecca established the Rashidun Caliphate. However, only Quraysh tribe members could be elected caliph. The first caliph was Abu Bakr, who died just 2 years later from illness. Umar, however, the second caliph, who was appointed in 634, conquered Mesopotamia, Syria, and Palestine by 640, Egypt by 642, and the Persian Empire by 643, which is quite a lot for just 3 years. His conquests of those regions were aided by the fact that they were pretty lenient with the people that they conquered. For one thing, they followed Muhammad's code of conduct that he had laid down previously before he passed away. According to the translation from Yusuf Abu Aynan's Islamic Rulings on Warfare, Muhammad said, "Do not commit treachery or deviate from the right path. You must not mutilate dead bodies, neither kill a child, nor a woman, nor an aged man. Bring no harm to the trees, nor burn them with fire, especially those which are fruitful. Slay not any of the enemy's flock, save for your food. You are likely to pass by people who have devoted their lives to monastic services. Leave them alone. This method of warfare really helped them endear themselves to the people that they were conquering. I mean, in so much as you can to a people you're conquering. And that it was not the, raping and pillaging of people as committed by a lot of armies. It was very much spare the women and children, do not go raising farmland, do not kill the livestock besides what you expressly need to survive, and spare people that are devoted to monastic services. Not even specifically Islam, just any religious services. Also, one of the things that the Islamic Empire had going for it was the fact that in its original form it did not have churches, priests, specific hierarchy besides just the fact, besides the ruling caliphate, an aristocracy, or castes. They may have arisen in terms of how the government worked out, but within Islam itself, it does not have those things. Non-Muslims, in fact, had a great deal of tolerance and security under the Islamic Empire. Women even had the right to vote, inherit, work, earn, and keep wages. They kept their name, or had the option of keeping their name in marriage. They were allowed to initiate divorce and refuse additional wives. So, with all of the tolerance and security, while they did still conquer these lands, they had a great deal of appeal going for them. Umar, the caliph at the time, did not even require conversion to Islam or complete control of the people he conquered. The conquered lands retained their religion, language, and customs. He only imposed governors and financial officers, which were kind of necessary for taxation purposes, as well as a sort of centralized form to respond back to the caliph. However, not everyone was happy with being conquered, of course. I mean, can't please everyone, especially when you're conquering them. And in 644, Umar was assassinated by a Persian slave, at which point Uthman, the third caliph, was appointed. He continued extending the Islamic Empire, conquering some of North Africa and conducting raids into Spain, and also oversaw the final compilation of the Quran. However, he had quite a few detractors due to his appointing of family members as governors of key provinces, which led to a riot outside of his home in which he was killed. At that point, Ali was elected as the caliph, and he is considered the first true caliph by Shia Muslims. However, his reign did not last for very long, as a civil war broke out between the Rashidun Caliphate and supporters of the assassination of Uthman. The civil war ended up leading to the assassination of Ali in 661, at which point the next caliphate was established, the Umayyad Caliphate, which, rather than having an elected caliphate specifically chosen from the Quraysh tribe, it had a hereditary caliphate. This caliphate was probably the largest, it was the largest caliphate under the Islamic Empire, and they consolidated power in North Africa and expanded the empire into Spain and slightly into Asia, not like China, but getting close to the border of India. At its height, they controlled 7.45% of the world's land, roughly 400.3 million square miles, and around 29% of the world's population, 62 million people. So this is one of the largest empires in recorded history. However, just because they were expanding does not mean that they were well liked by the people. People began to resent them for the Arab aristocracy that rose up, and especially non-Arabs that were increasingly becoming a part of the empire due to the conquests, resented their inferior status as non-Arabs. Combined with the unequal distribution of wealth among the aristocracy, and going specifically to those of Arab descent, it went against Islamic ideals, and as a result, the Umayyad Caliphate was overthrown in 750, at which point the Abbasid Caliphate replaced the Umayyad Caliphate and switched out Arabism with Islam as a requirement for first-class citizenship. Sort of like how Marshall Hodgson puts in his Rethinking World History, on conversion to Islam, any office was open to a man, which was pretty good propaganda for switching to Islam, meaning that, you had your options open to everything. Also, under the Abbasid Caliphate, this is really when the philosophy, the sciences, and the economy flourished. Arabic numerals were quickly adopted by the West, who at that time still used Roman numerals, although at the time they were kind of frowned upon as the fear of the spread of Eastern influence. But due to how much easier they were to use for calculations than Roman numerals, most officials would use Arabic numerals and then just write down the Roman numeral equivalent once they had done their calculations on the official form. Also, under the Abbasids, algebra was formally invented by Musa al-Khwarizmi. Muslim scholars also saved a lot of the Greek and Roman texts, including the works of Aristotle, which were reintroduced to the West in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. So, the Muslims and Islamic Empire is actually to thank for a lot of Western culture that's derived. However, problems started to crop up as provinces became more independent, starting around the mid-800s. However, even while the provinces started to become more independent and were less easily controlled by the Caliphate, the Islamic Empire still remained strong until the Mongols came in and just wrecked their shit. The first major blow, and really the killing blow, was the destruction of Baghdad by the Mongols in 1258, under Hulagu Khan, who was the grandson of Genghis Khan. The destruction of Baghdad is hard to overstate in just how serious it was. The Mongols slaughtered over 200,000 people, filled in irrigation systems that had kept the area agriculturally stable for generations. They literally salted the earth and dumped the contents of schools and libraries into the Tigris River until, as survivors put it, the Tigris River ran black with ink and red with blood. And at that point, they also killed the Abbasid Caliph, ending the Abbasid Caliphate. After that, while the Islamic Empire technically survived, it was pretty much a shell of its former self. The Ottomans tried to claim the Caliphate in 1362. However, their power was never very strong and quickly eroded. And by the time that the West had their scientific revolution and industrial revolution, the remnants of the Islamic Empire were just completely outclassed, leaving them susceptible to Western intervention, which is pretty much where we get to how things are today. Now, I'm going to stop with my history of the Islamic Empire there, as that's pretty much where the Islamic Empire ended. But, as you can see, it started out with just Muhammad and the tribes within Mecca and Medina, and grew rapidly due to their remarkable tolerance for other religions and cultures. Whereas Christian conquests typically imposed Christian ideals and religion on the conquered, the Islamic Empire was largely content with letting the people remain as they were and simply paying homage to the caliphate through the form of taxes. And because of the Islamic Empire, much of Western culture survived through the works of Aristotle and other Greek thinkers. So while this has been a very brief history of the Islamic Empire, I hope now you can sort of understand how it ties together with the West, and how while the Roman Empire fell and the Western civilizations were sort of struggling at that time, the world as a whole was not regressing at that point. The Islamic empires really continued the scientific advancements. While not quite to the same extent as the Roman Empire, they contributed a lot, and without them, we would not have what we understand as Western culture today. So hopefully you get that sense of, how things tie together and sort of the importance of the Islamic Empire in Western culture. And I hope you enjoyed that, and we'll see you next time on Between the Lines.